Hi, I'm Alexis Mikhailo, and I'm recording answers to the Bear Scientist Role portion questions. Question 1. How would you describe a bear biologist? What parts do you like, and which are your least favorite? A bear biologist is a scientist who studies some aspect of bears as organisms and how they act in their environments, which means there are many different scientific tools you can incorporate into your studies. A bear biologist might study bears in the wild, in zoos, or even extinct bears from fossils in museums. My favorite part of being a bear biologist is getting to see their tracks safely in the wild. I spend a lot of time studying bear samples in the laboratory, so I don't often get to see a living bear. I like knowing that the work I do in the laboratory is directly connected to living animals in the wild. One time, when I was working in Japan, I saw giant claw scratch marks on a tree from a brown bear that had been stretching, and it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. My least favorite part of being a bear biologist is when there's a conflict between bears and humans. Sometimes bears come into urban areas to look for food, and it's unsafe for both humans and the bears. This is happening more and more as human populations expand into bear habitat and as our climate changes, which in turn alters which foods are available to the bears. Seeing this conflict is hard and leads to some really tough discussions and decisions, but it's important as bear scientists that we know how to balance the needs of both bears and humans to ensure the well-being of everyone now and in the future. Question 2. Tell me about what kinds of things you study and research in the field. I primarily study the history of bears in North America, their ecology, diet, and evolutionary patterns, as well as what caused their extinction in some places. I use hair and skeletal material, such as teeth and jaws, to sample long dead animals, which requires some advanced techniques in chemistry. For example, I've worked with fossils from the La Brea tar pits of Los Angeles to document the earliest arrival of grizzly bears in California thousands of years ago. I had to use special chemicals to remove the tar, which is actually just asphalt, from the bones, then extract proteins from the bones, and use a technique known as radiocarbon dating to determine how long ago the bear died. I don't often get to interact with living bears, but I spend plenty of time with bear skulls, including those of the extinct giant short-faced bear, which is pretty awesome. Question 3. How much education did you need to get to this point, and where did you study? I want to start by saying that everyone has a different path, and there are many different approaches to studying bear biology that are equally valid. I am more of an academic scientist, which means that I ended up in school for many years, and my job is mostly research and teaching at a university. However, there are many bear biologists who I know learned more from being outside and through personal experience than going to school for as many years as I did. So, don't let my personal story make you feel like you aren't ready to be a bear biologist if you don't like school that much. I went to school for 4 years as an undergraduate at Cornell University in upstate New York, where I studied biology and natural resource management. Then, I went to graduate school to pursue a PhD in biology at Stanford University in California, which took me another 5 years. I didn't actually start studying bears until after I finished my PhD. Before that, I studied the conservation of other mammal species. As long as you develop a solid foundation in biology, you can then choose to study different species when the opportunity arises. I've been studying bears now for the past 3 years as a professional scientist, and I learn something new every day. Question 4. Are there several kinds of specializations a person can have as a bear scientist? Tell me about some. There are many different things a person can study about bears, which means that there are often different specializations that rely on different scientific techniques. For example, someone could be a specialist on studying the diseases and health problems that affect bears and might have a background as a veterinarian. Another specialist could work specifically on the evolution of bears as a group, studying fossils that are millions of years old from all over the world. Some specialists might study the behavior of bears and have to spend hours in the field watching them through binoculars or keeping track of them using camera traps. A bear geneticist could focus on studying the DNA of bears and reconstruct the family tree of different bear populations and species. An important specialization is human-wildlife conflict, in which a researcher will study how people living near bears feel about the bears or might take steps to protect their livestock. Question 5. Why is your research important for the reintroduction conversation? If there is a reintroduction plan being discussed, it by definition means that the target species has disappeared from the landscape and can no longer be studied in the present day. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to reintroduce it because it would still be there. Because we can't study the animal directly in the present, we need other sources of data to tell us critical pieces of information, like what its diet was, what it looked like, and what resources on a landscape it needed to survive. My research opens a direct window into past populations of bears, and we can use museum specimens and fossils to reconstruct what their lives were like. This gives us a baseline or set of reference conditions with which to determine what the goals of a reintroduction activity should be. How many bears should there be? Where exactly should we put them? You need to look to the past to help plan for this future. Another dimension of my research relates more to the way that bears and people interact with each other, which is important for reintroduction because overhunting and persecution is what caused the loss of bears in the first place. In California, there's a lot of misinformation about bears that originates from stories in the 1800s calling them giant man-eating carnivores. When we study the bones of bears, however, it turns out that they were much smaller and more herbivorous. By changing the story, we can make people today better appreciate the true nature of the bears and be less weary of their introduction.